Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the I Am 1-2 podcast with your host, Christopher Cohn. With me, as always, is my good friend, my co-pilot, my producer, who all of this would not happen without, my good friend Dan the Man in the studio. Say hello to everybody, Dan.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. We hope you are going to enjoy it. I don't have to hope it.
This topic especially applies to everybody. So today we're going to talk about codependency, what it is, how to treat it, how to identify it. You know it when you see it, and it can be debilitating. So hang on for that. We will get into that and help you with that tool. Before we do that, just to welcome our new listeners, in case this is your first time joining the podcast, this is an all things recovery podcast, which means what? Recovery, if you look up the word, says to go back and reclaim that which has been lost, or our good friend Dan added, or stolen. And that is what life does to us. That happy, joyous, and free state that the big book talks about, a big book, that we were as children, and if you have children around you, they're happy, joyous, and free. You get ruined by man's world, not by God, by man's world and the way we've set it up. Our politics, our policies, the way greed, selfishness, all that stuff, and it just wrecks your heart. And so this is all about going back and reclaiming that side of myself that can be free of that matrix, and I can live life on my own terms if I only have a toolkit to do so. And we do not provide good toolkits in America. In America, it's about buying something, eating something, drinking something, screwing something, or just getting something to fix yourself from the outside without going inward. And recovery is all about cleaning your own house. Let's get back here. Let's get rid of the infection. Let's go inside and get rid of all the things that have defiled you, and you'll come out a fresh new soul. And you'll be happy, joyous, and free, even as 62 years old, as I am. So, welcome to the podcast. We are glad you're here. So, codependency, it is a very interesting, debatable, and complicated topic. So we'll go back to the origins of where these ideas came from, and then we'll explain some of the science behind it and how that word was found, and then we'll get into the treatment of it or for how to, first of all, the qualities of a person that has codependency, and then talk about treatments and things you can do to get better. So back in the 1930s, when AA was starting, Bill was bringing meetings into his house because at that time, churches didn't want anything to do with alcoholics for the most part. There was a church that was letting them have a group called the Oxford Group before AA, but all the parishioners were telling the preacher, Buchanan or whatever it was, that they wanted them out of there, those alcoholics. It's a joke we have in recovery. If you've been thrown out of the temple, you're an alcoholic. And Bill's getting well by working with other alcoholics, talking to other alcoholics, so he's having meetings in his home, and the husbands are coming with their wives, but the wives are staying outside, and the husbands are having their meeting. And somewhere around 5 years of Bill's recovery, there's a famous scene, and there's a movie about it called When Love Is Not Enough with Winona Ryder. It's about the story of Lois Wilson, his wife. There's a story about Bill called My Name is Bill W. with James Woods. That's an older film. You can find them on YouTube usually or out there somewhere. And that's a great film about the formation of AA. But this is really the story of Lois and what she went through with Bill, and then her forming of Al-Anon, which is for friends and family of the alcoholic and the addict, help them work on themselves to heal from this disease. So about 5 years' time, Lois found herself in the kitchen as usual, making coffee and cake and whatever for the boys. And Bill leaves his head in the door and says, "We need more coffee." And she lost her marbles. She had a meltdown. She took off her shoe and threw it at his head. This is in the movie, and I've read the documentation. That's what happened. And she just screamed at him that I can't take this anymore. And what she said was very prophetic about the way codependency can affect you forever if you don't treat it. And she said, "You got sober 5 years ago and then stopped drinking, and I'm as mad at you now as I was when you were still drinking." Now, that's a very powerful statement. And she's carrying all that rage and all that resentment, and she's got nowhere to dump it. She's got nobody to talk to. So she said, I'm at it. And he didn't know what she was doing. She goes outside onto the street, and this just gives you some perspective if anybody thinks we haven't progressed as a species. All the women are sitting in their cars waiting for their husbands to come out. They're not sitting in the driver's seat, not in the 30s. They're sitting in the passenger seat and waiting on their husbands like they're dogs parked by the curb. It's really embarrassing. And she gets, come on, ladies, come on. And they're all like, what do we do? And she's like, come on. And she drags them into the house. And the next time Bill pokes his head in the door and says, we need coffee, she goes, get out of here. We're having our own meeting. And she took Alcoholics Anonymous's 12 steps to start her own groups for the family and friends who have been afflicted by this disease. A very brave, courageous, and strong woman in the 1930s to do that. So that was the founding of beginning to understand that first, the family and the friends are desperately broken and damaged by this disease. And we know this, but again, it wasn't really codified into any kind of malady or any kind of condition, right? So, and they didn't even have the word codependent yet, all right? So we have these meetings, and they're going along, and in the 1980s, which is when I came up in recovery, there was a lot of exciting stuff going on, and a lot of it was through an organization called Hazelden Hospital up in Minnesota, which is where I went to treatment. I didn't go to Hazelden, but I had the option. But my counselor said, do you want to go to the country club or do you want to go to the psych hospital where they're going to do real deal hardcore treatment? And I said, I need the hardcore treatment. I can't believe I said that, but I did at the time. I was pretty broken. And so anyway, through all that, they came up with this idea of a thing called a co-alcoholic. And a co-alcoholic was the person that was involved with the alcoholic, the enabler sometimes, that was another term that came up, or a person that would almost get in the way of the person getting well. So the co-alcoholic, as the person maybe pisses themselves, passes out on the front lawn, not going to go to work the next day. The co-alcoholic, being dutiful to try and help them, will go out on the lawn and drag them inside, change their clothes, put them to bed, and maybe even call the boss the next day to say, I'm sorry he's not in for work, but he's sick. And when that co-alcoholic lies at that moment, and maybe honesty is one of their core principles, they've just violated a part of themselves. And they get sucked into the disease and start doing the same behaviors the alcoholic is doing. Because we talk about alcoholism and addiction is a disease that turns you into something you are not. So then after a while, they came up with this term called chemical dependency when it came to alcoholism and drug addiction. They wanted one catch-all phrase. And during the 80s, that happened as well. And as chemical dependency came about as a diagnosis, that's where the term codependency came about. You follow me? So it wasn't just for alcoholics or addicts. It was for everybody around the alcoholic or addict. You might have codependency. And it's a catch-all phrase. It's not really a very good descriptive phrase. And to this day, when I said the debatable, there's still a lot of debate within the research community whether or not this condition exists. But I will tell you one thing for damn certain. If you are in recovery and you have your eyes open, when you see it, you see it. You know it. It's the same kind of deal like therapists will joke and say, borderline's tricky too, but when you see it, you smell it, you're like, yeah, that's borderline right there. So that's what we're going to talk about today, codependency, what it does to you and how it affects you. So at the beginning, when codependency came about, the term, they were concentrating on treatment as how can we get this person to stop interfering in the alcoholic getting well, even though they think they're helping, and can we get them to they're allowing the disease to continue. So that was the first focus, is to sort of get them out of the picture with that. But there was really no treatment specifically for them, okay? And then it changed over time to how can the codependent understand how they've been affected by the disease and heal themselves, right? So first the treatment was, well, let's get them out of the way and get them to stop doing what they're doing so the alcoholic can get well. And then it became about, no, wait a minute, they've been damaged. Let's get them to help heal themselves and treat this own condition that they have. And again, it's never officially been called a disease yet or anything like that. And there's no insurance money to pay for you to go to treatment for it either. All right. So, what is codependency, and what is it? How does it manifest? And let me get a little water from my whistle here. Thank you. All right. So, one of the most important traits to realize, and we're talking about just sort of an overview of codependency, is that codependency is about being externally focused, meaning you're going to have this hyper vigilance, this hypersensitivity to the environment around you and to the people around you. Now, there's this big debate: is it genetic? Is it nature nurture kind of deal? And I don't think there's any basis so far in any of the literature that can says there is a genetic reality of what causes people to do this. But I know for certain if you grew up in a dysfunctional family, and that means a family that had some sort of handicap going on in it, could be mental illness, could be alcoholism and addiction, you're probably going to have some form of codependency, which is hyper tuned to the exterior, right? Trying to help see what's going on. There's a crisis after crisis. And then always in an alcoholic addict family, yes, you have codependency. And if you're alcoholic or addict today, I'm sorry to tell you, but you have some form of codependency occurring in your life as well, just from having that disease. So a lot of my patients might fight me on this, and they're like, well, what do you mean I have codependency? And I'm like, well, look at your past relationships. So for everybody out there, how healthy have they been? And did you have issues expressing your feelings, getting your own needs met, setting boundaries? Those are things codependents have terrible trouble with. So yes, I'm of the opinion that the entire population has some form and degree of codependency, but obviously people from alcoholic addict families, I think, have it the worst, and there's reasons for that. So hold on. So again, we talked about it being externally focused. There's another phrase that really jumps out, and it's losing self in others. So in other words, as I'm helping you, as I'm getting caught up in your issues, I lose my own identity. I lose my sense of self. I lose my ability to fulfill my own needs because I'm so concentrated on the crisis of cleaning up the addict with the peed pans and getting him in bed and making sure he doesn't lose the job so the family's not out on the street, right? So one of the goals is to shift this external focus back to more of an internal focus, to get the person to concentrate more on themselves. And it's really interesting. There's this big mistaken idea out there in the general population that when you go to Al-Anon, it's just a bunch of people sitting in a room complaining about the drunk. And all they're doing is bitching about the drug addict. And yes, that's true. That's what they do at first. But a good Al-Anon meeting will immediately correct you and say, excuse me, I'm sorry, they're not here right now, so why don't you talk about you? And that's what recovery is. We're going to stop being externally focused, talking about them, and let's talk about you. How do you feel? What's going on with you? How is this affecting you? And I will tell you, this is maddening as a therapist, and it can be maddening as a sponsor if you have a dude or a dudette that has this issue, because you keep saying, stop talking about them, and they'll circle right back. And next thing you know, but that bitch, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, stop talking about them. Okay, yeah, you're right. And they go right back to that resentment. It's fierce, that focus on others. Now, this is really profound, I believe, as if you've seen our episode on trauma and attachment. Trauma and attachment wounds are considered a main source of this loss of self in others. So then when we get to that nature-nurture idea, you're talking about growing up in an environment where maybe you didn't have good attachment with your parents because they weren't available for some reason, either because of crises or because they were emotionally unavailable. So that's going to wound you. And then trauma incidences will wound you, where it's like, I'll have to be hyper-tuned in the environment so that I don't get hurt again, right? So again, what they're saying is trauma and attachment wounds are a major source of codependency and this loss of self in others. All right. Now, there's 3 general rules that govern a codependent person and also the members of a codependent family. So the children are affected, everybody that's in the family get affected. And those unspoken rules, they're not shared with others, they're just there, are don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel. Why is that? Well, those are survival skills. In my alcoholic family, learning how to shut up was good when Dad was drunk, because that way you don't get shit thrown at you, you don't get hurt. Learning not to trust also prevents you from being hurt again, because the last time you trusted them and they said they were going to show up and be there and they didn't show up, well, you got hurt really bad. So then you know, okay, I'm not going to trust the words. I'm not going to trust what you're saying because I've been burned before. And don't feel, that is another survival skill. It's too painful to feel that disappointment and that rejection or that sometimes physical violence over and over and over. So again, these are 3 rules that tend to govern them. Don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel. And for therapists out there, that can be an obstacle when you're trying to get them to build a working relationship with you. They're going to have that background noise saying, don't trust, and I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. It's astonishing how much codependence will hold back information-wise to people who are trying to help the person they're codependent with. Like if I'm codependent with an addict and this counselor or therapist trying to help the addict, this person will almost shortcut or sabotage it. And there is some belief in that, you know, when the alcoholic or addict gets well, the codependent kind of loses their job. Remember, it's that exterior focus and that focus of not on self, but on that other self. And if they lose that, then who are they? And so actually, most codependents within families go through a period of depression, sometimes anger and resentment against the person getting sober. And especially when they start going to meetings and it's these other people fixing them and not them, because that was their job. You see? All right, so what do codependents have difficulty with? They have difficulty experiencing appropriate levels of self-esteem. Appropriate levels, which means they're usually in the basement. They don't have any even moderate levels of self-esteem. They have trouble setting functional boundaries. I like the term functional. I highlighted that because functional means that they're workable and it's something that can be achieved, whereas the boundaries with codependents are usually nothing, or they set these really fierce ones because they're mad at the time, but then they never adhere to it. So functional, somewhere in the middle there. Owning and expressing their own reality. Instead of blaming everybody else for how you feel, instead of saying it's their fault and focusing and talking about them, I'm going to own my own reality that I feel this way and I am not happy. But that's very difficult for them to speak their truth. So they can't own their own reality. It's very difficult for them to take care of their adult needs and wants. First of all, they can't speak their needs and wants. They've been disappointed too much. I need this, and you say you're going to help me out, and then the crisis hits, they get drunk again. What's the point, right? They just give up. And they have difficulty experiencing and expressing their own reality moderately. Keyword moderately. They can be very drama. They are almost addicted to drama in many ways. Again, not picking on them, not putting them down. I'm describing the condition itself, that you get addicted to the drama of it. So expressing yourself is never moderate. It's always like, and they did this, and then they did this, and I couldn't believe it, they did it. It's almost like they revel in how extreme the person took it. And it's like, okay, all right. Are you getting high off this or what? Well, guess what? This was a major turning point for me and a therapist in understanding codependency, where I think I heard it in a training or somewhere, where they said, you need to understand one thing only about codependency. It's just like alcoholism and addiction in that the person cannot stop it. They are powerless over doing this. And it's just like alcoholism and addiction in that the alcoholic or addict is getting their fix from the bottle. The codependent gets their fix from fixing others, and it works out. And then they get their approval, and then they get their praise, and then they get to look good, and then they look like they had the answer and that they're the amazing one. You see what I'm saying? It's the same kind of response that I'm trying to fill a hole inside. And codependents have a deep, deep hole inside. That's why they don't have that sense of self. So let me work on that external thing, which is myself, and then when that works out, okay, see, that validates me. I'm good, I'm okay. Makes sense? All right, therefore, if those are the difficulty and the core features that the codependent has, then when the treatment, if you're going to get a therapist, these are some of the things that should focus on. We want to bring it back to an internal focus rather than an external focus. And this is going to take a sponsor and or therapist with a stubborn mindset to keep referring, bring it back to you, bring it back to you, bring it back to you, bring it back to you. They will eat up an entire hour of treatment for them, talking about the other person. Look, we need a little background information so I hear what happened last weekend, but if you spend the whole hour talking about you, you're going to get ripped off here. And a bad therapist will do that. A bad therapist will just sit there and let you talk. and then say, see you next week. There's a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, I know of several, I've heard of therapists that will just, I heard one therapist call them out saying it was the worried well. These are people who have money and they're basically okay, but the therapist is milking them by just bringing them in to talk every week, but there's no real help or therapy going on. Therapy means we're going to do some work, not just talk every week, and certainly not just talk about them. So again, one of the treatment goals is bring it from an external focus back to an internal focus. We want to bring it back to self-care versus self-neglect or over-care of others. Right? I'm overextending myself, trying to worry about them, not sleeping, not eating because I'm worried about them. Let's bring it back to self-care. And self-care is my favorite word when people say you have to be selfish in recovery. No, this is not a selfish program. This is a selfless program. When you get well, you're going to help others. This is a self-care program. Self-care is like I have to go to the bathroom a couple of times a day. I have to take a shower. I have to brush my teeth. I also have to get my needs met emotionally, sexually, all other ways. That is self-care. It's nothing bad about it, okay? But be careful of that word selfish because it adds that negative tinge to it when you're just taking care of yourself in recovery. You're taking care of your recovery. When we say, I have to be selfish about my recovery, no, you're being self-care. You're protecting your recovery. Another thing is we want to bring it back to self-control versus the efforts to control others. This external focus also goes along with control, and hang on, I'm going to share something really major about that in a second. But we want to bring it back to, let's work on your self-control so you don't fall into these patterns versus worried about controlling what they're doing, which is, again, hard for them to let go. And we want to bring it back to your own emotional expression versus denial or emotional suppression. Denial is a big one, man. You can confront a codependent about what they're doing, and they'll kind of dress it up. We used to have this woman who would come to our groups on Saturday. I used to do Family Day, and she would be a representative for Al-Anon. And I loved her because she was brutally honest. I love people who are brutally honest about their story. And people's jaws would drop when she would talk about, like, well, my daughter was dying from addiction, and I'm trying to save her. So I'm in my car, in my van, and I'm in my PJs, and I'm down in the hood at 3 o'clock in the morning looking for my daughter, thinking I'm going to save her life. Now, that's not healthy. That's not self-care. That's dangerous. But in her mind, she had rationalized it. That's that denial piece to, well, I'm just trying to save my daughter's life. And who can argue with that? Try saying that to anybody. I'm just trying to save my son or daughter's life. How can they argue with that? Right? So that's a perfect alibi. Another thing she talked about is she was trying to bust him, right? All the time trying to find him doing something. And she swore to God, she was walking through her house one day and she saw a joint on the floor. And she's like, I know that's marijuana and I'm going to smoke it to prove it. So she picked it up and she lit it up and she smoked it and there's nothing coming off it. And she figured out it was a dried up bug. It was not marijuana. And I'm like, holy crap. I'm sitting there listening to her going, that's really sick. That's what we're talking about. It can actually affect your perceptions, that you're so obsessed that I'm going to catch them, that you're not even thinking straight. Maybe you're driving crazy through traffic because you're following them and you go through a red light. You go through a red light to like thinking, I can't lose the car. Again, putting your own life in danger. So why do they do it? What's really going on with the codependent, the alcoholic? What's this whole, how are they getting their fix, Again, like I said, please understand they are powerless, and please understand it's really trying to fulfill a need they have inside, but they're going about it through outward means, which is what the alcoholic does all the time. To me, that's the core of addiction, is I'm taking something from the outside to fix my insides, right? And that's never a workable plan. Sure, you'll get a fix for a few minutes, but it won't last. So, all right, so what they're really seeking, 2 core issues to pick on, would be approval, and they're seeking their own self-esteem, right? So the quote I found was, the external focus can be a person's attempt to manage their own anxiety they have inside about the world, right? So if I can fix and control the environment around me, then I don't have to worry so much about the war in Ukraine. Right? I don't have to worry so much about the price of eggs in the grocery store, right? All that free-floating anxiety we have, but I can manage this. And there's actually a big control element as well around addicts and alcoholics when they use. that ceremony of getting home and putting out your stuff and preparing everything else to use and getting the pipes and everything ready and rolling up a joint or whatever it is. There's a ritual and there's a control element that I can't control. The rest of my life is a shit show, but I can control this. And it's reassuring. It's a safety thing. So one more time, this external focus can be an attempt to manage a person's own anxiety issues inside about the world in general, but I'm just going to work on this and focus on that, and I don't have to think about the rest of that stuff. Also, codependence can experience an undefined sense of self, and therefore will look for external frameworks to obtain this self-definition. So again, if I don't know who I am, I'm not in touch with my own feelings, I've lost touch with my own feelings, I will look for some sort of external framework which defines me. And I guess a classic example of that would be somebody who says that they are their job. You know, you ask a person, who are they? And they'll be like, well, I'm an engineer and I do that. Well, you're not what you do. Like, who are you inside? And they don't really know, right? So one more time, codependents experience an undefined sense of self, and they'll look for some sort of external framework with which to obtain some form of self-definition. Well, who are you? Well, I'm an addict's mom, or I'm a caregiver for my grandmother who has Alzheimer's, right? And that's their definition of self to get their self-worth. One helpful tip to get well as well is to think of specific Okay, when you're working on your issues, rather than use the label, sometimes a label is too far for people to stretch. I know in my group, the word alcoholic and addict, let alone junkie or drunk, is a bridge too far for a lot of people coming in. So I'll sweeten it and I'll lighten it up a little bit and say, well, can you admit that you have some issues with your drinking? Do you think you have a problem with your pot smoking? And they can usually do that one without having to call themselves an alcoholic or an addict. Well, I think the term codependency, as I've been taught, is another bridge that can be too far for people. So instead of working on myself being flawed, that I'm a codependent, let's instead identify the key behaviors that you don't like about yourself. And let's work on those as being codependent, right? So we're going to separate you from the condition so that you don't feel any judgment. So what I'm doing in this one situation with this one person, I can admit is a little codependent, but I don't have to be completely broken as a person and have codependency. It seems to work a little bit better in the process, right? So let's identify and work on the particular behaviors you don't like about yourself, all right? Now, some of our behaviors are actually pretty good and they're well-intentioned. Again, if I have a grandmother or a mother who's sick and I'm overextending myself to help them, then that's a good behavior. But where's the point where we, quote unquote, take it too far? And the point we take it too far with codependency is it causing you negative consequences? Now, this is difficult because in the short term, you do have people in your family who might get sick, or you might go to work because one of them lost their job and now you have to pick up the slack. And so you may find yourself overextended at times. But over a continual pattern of your whole life where you're denying your own needs and you're overextending yourself, the old adage of burning the candle at the both ends, you'll blow up, and that's not healthy. So again, we just want to identify the points where I'm taking it a little too far and falling into that codependency. All right. Let's see here. Really interesting, too, for therapists, but also for everybody else. When you go to treatment and they might diagnose you with depression or they might diagnose you with anxiety, the hidden factor might be codependency. This can be true for alcoholism and addiction, too. We get a lot of people in my mental hospital who come to the Brook for some issue or another, and then they find out later, oh, they're diagnosing me with a alcohol problem, and I didn't know I had one. I didn't mean to tell them that, right? They're not putting the dots together. So anxiety or depression, and there was another one here. What was it? Relationship problems. I'm just here to talk about my relationship problems. Where's the codependency? There's somewhere in there, right? All right, so treatment options. What can we do about this jazz and get out of it and be well and heal ourselves? Big fan of therapy. Might have figured that out. I think individual therapy one-on-one is perfect for this. When you're looking for a therapist in this field, there's not going to be a specialist. I want to say that with some conditions, there might be one or two out there, like the person that ran this training I was in this past year. She was pretty damn good. but there's no specific training for this field. Like there is for chemical dependency. And I would look for a relationship therapist, marriage counselor, maybe. Somebody that specializes in addiction would be pretty fluent in the language, and these would be good places to start. But be upright with them up front at first and say, I want to work on my codependency. Do you have experience with that? And if they're a good counselor, ethically, they'll tell you what their limitations are and refer you out. Every counselor that's good has a list of referrals. They can send you to the person you need. But again, it may be a little difficult to find the right fit for you. I want to put a word out for Al-Anon. That's the unsung hero of our 12-step movement that doesn't get much love because there's this fun rivalry between AA and NA and Al-Anon. We just joke about them. They joke about us. But God love them. They are doing that work to help heal our families. And I can't get families to go. I just advised a woman a few weeks ago, please go to Al-Anon. Well, I've been thinking about it. I think even my mom would go with me. I said, well, go. I don't know or don't think she's gone yet of that focus still on her child. And that's hard when it's a child that has addiction. I get it. But you're no good to them if you're wrecked. If you don't take care of you, and you're not going to be able to be there for them. And we talked about all that, and they were on board, but it's so hard to get a codependent to stop focusing on them and let's work on you, right? I want to put a couple words out for a sponsor. Obviously, this is somebody you can talk to who knows your story, and they can hold you accountable. And I want to talk about this daily inventory thing, which is really helpful as well, is to sort of say, when you call your sponsor, you're supposed to say, hey, I did good in this area. In this part of the relationship, I set my boundary. I stuck to it. And praise yourself, give yourself some pats on the back. And then at other times, call yourself out and say, yeah, but I really fell into it, and I didn't tell them no when I wanted to say no, and I really did that, and I don't know why. It's an insidious disease, right? So don't be so hard on yourself. It's very hard to deal with this. Classic story I may have told before, but for anybody who's new, a good friend of mine was laying on the couch after working a 10-day straight shift as a nurse, had a day off, and she just wanted to lay on the couch and watch Netflix and eat candy and relax. And that's all she was doing, was being a slug. And her mother calls out of nowhere and says, hey, honey, what you doing? And she found herself making shit up about what she was doing. I'm getting ready to go, and I'm going to do this, and That's codependency. She's focused on what her mom cares. When her mom generally doesn't care, all you got to do is tell her, I worked 10 days straight. I'm not doing a damn thing. Now, for all you people out there that think, maybe you don't have this is where I say I think everybody has some of this. How many times do we tell white lies through a day instead of just telling somebody, this is what's really going on? If you're an addict or an alcoholic, guess what? You have this bad. I'm 40 plus years sober, and I almost told my friend Dan a lie on the way here. I was going to tell him I'm going to leave my workplace at 2:45. And I was leaving at about 2:35, but I had to stop for gas. I said, why don't you just tell him you have to get gas? I don't know. It just said, just tell him you're leaving later than you are, and then he'll understand why you're a little late. I said to myself, what the fuck? This is what I'm saying. It's insidious. So I just told him, I said, yeah, I got to stop to get gas. I'm leaving now. And I was able to change that. But you really need a sponsor when you're starting out to help hold you accountable to changing your behaviors. Say, I'm going to set this goal. I'm not going to fall into their shit. I'm going to keep my boundary. And then you can go over it with your sponsor later and say, I did good or I didn't do good. Sponsors are there to support you. They're not there to hurt you. They're there to support you. Please use that as a tool. And where are you going to find that? At meetings. You've got to go to a meeting and get a good Al-Anon sponsor. And that would be someone that has what you want. When they talk about their relationship, sounds attractive. When they talk about how they speak up for themselves, sounds good. I don't know how to do that. Teach me how to do that. And that's what sponsors do. God love them. All right. Another very helpful tip when you're starting out in therapy or on your own journey of healing, let's identify the behaviors on a scale. Now, a scale is like that, right? It only tips one way or the other based on how much weight we're putting on one side or the other. So we have a scale in codependency where it's going to tip one way too much to myself, or it's going to tip one way too much to the other person, especially the key person you're being codependent with. And each behavior you do through the day, try to evaluate yourself on that scale. Like, I did pretty good. I set my boundaries, took care of myself, but in this one thing, I didn't speak up. And so I had too much worry about what they would think. too much concern about what they felt. And I should have been like balancing that out. So that's a very helpful visual. Where is that balance between the two sides? Another way to think of it, and I think is very helpful, is that this behavior is on a continuum. It's a straight line, just like a timeline. And on one end of the continuum of codependency, you've got okay, healthy behaviors. I did good, and I stepped up for myself, spoke my truth. On the other side of the continuum, you've got, I went too far. I went too far with my codependency. I went too far by trying too hard. Went too hard by doing too much, right? Made too much food for everybody, put up with all that stuff. I went too far. I just went too far. It's another helpful tool when you're trying to identify the behaviors you want to work on, right? Most of all, when you're working on yourself in recovery, try to be flexible. With this disease, there's going to be conditions that come up with your family or at work where you're going to be asked at times to overextend yourself a bit. No big deal if it's short term. If my mom needs help after surgery, I'll overextend myself on sleep and stuff trying to help her. No big deal. But let it not fall into a routine. That's where it gets to be very unhealthy for you. All right. Let's see here. And I love that we do a daily inventory as part of our 12-step program, which means at the end of the day, I'll sit on the side of my bed and I'll really look over how was my day. How did I do in every situation? Was it loving? Was it tolerant? Was it kind? Did I screw up anything that I might need to make amends for tomorrow? And, specifically as you're working on your codependent behaviors, right? Not just yourself, but I'm going to work on these specific behaviors. Give yourself a rating that, I did pretty good today, or I need to work on this and call my sponsor about it. And that sort of keeps us in check, just having to do that inventory every day. But when you're doing inventory, you want to do it with zero judgment. Make sure you're not being hard on yourself, and make sure you're taking account of your good successes as well and celebrating when you have those wins, right? All right. There's two last keys in your therapy work for codependency, and then I'll get Dan's take on this, and I do want to give you a little bit of my own experience. I think when you go to a therapist, family system work and trauma work should be the two areas to investigate. I do firmly believe that families breed codependency. Dysfunctional families breed it. How can I have boundaries or healthy boundaries if my parents don't even know what those are and they just walk all over them and they're teaching me that? How can I have trust with anybody and tell them how I feel if my own attachment with my parents was conditional? Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. So family system work and trauma work. Where were you hurt? Where were you wounded that turned you more into that external focused or shut you down? Those are the two main wounds that really need to be looked at through therapy. And then the last thing I always say about chemical dependency, but I'm going to say this about codependency, it's not your fault, right? Life happens to us. We don't have the toolkit. We do the best we can. We look back in hindsight and say, I wish I'd done this, or I should have done this different. That's no good. You didn't know at the time. My sponsor always said, you don't know what you don't know. Damn, that's too profound. What do you say? You don't know what you don't know. So if you didn't know it at the time, ease up on yourself. We all have had crappy relationships and done goofy shit in our past. But it does no good to look in the rear view and pick yourself apart about that. So let's look forward. Let's work on how we're going to recover from this condition. And if you don't, I will tell you it can get worse to the point where people need to be institutionalized. I have seen people have nervous breakdowns from their codependent behaviors, and they just hit the wall. They were not taking care of themselves. They just hit the wall and needed to go into a hospital. Let's not let that happen, please. Okay? All right. Before I tell you a little bit of my experience with this, just for a short version, get Dan in here on anything he wants to add. If you have any questions about this topic, because it's a very deep topic and I can only cover so much in the time we have, send your questions to Iam12, the word recovery, at gmail.com. That's Iam12recovery@gmail.com. And I'll be happy to attack any angle, or if you just want to talk about any of your problematic codependent behaviors that you're having trouble with, and maybe I can offer some tips and tidbits. I always tell my group, it's one thing for me to sit up here and lecture you and give you all this information, but it always is better in a group setting if you guys will bring up your stuff, and then as you talk about your issues and I am able to think, oh, I didn't think about that, let me tell you about this, it helps the next person. So please send us any questions you have about any problems you have in the relationships, boundaries, and all that good stuff that happens with codependency. In my family, it was tricky because, again, I don't blame my parents for the stuff that they did. They did, as we say in the program, the best they could. And they didn't have the toolkit. And I look at their parents and I'm like, well, look what they were given, right? And that's where healing really takes place when you're working on forgiveness, is you look at, well, what did they get? And what did they get? You realize they didn't know anything about any of this stuff. And I'm kind of judging them through today's eyes. It's just unfair. We know a lot more about therapy and about helping people today than we ever did. But, I mean, my mom married 3 alcoholics. It's not her fault. She did not know they were alcoholic when she married them. And that's just a repeatable pattern in codependency. It goes over and over and over again. And usually the people around us can see it. And I just learned a lot of instability. I learned a lot of not trust, and not safe. And biggest thing I learned, I think I'm wired a little like this too, so I'll give it that on the genetics, because Irish people, we're just shut down generally. We don't share our feelings. But being able to speak my feelings and speak my truth is something I've tried to work on very hard in my recovery. And it's probably such a big challenge. I'll probably have a whole podcast on that, speaking your truth. It is hard to just come out and say, no, thank you, I don't want to do that. Or, without making up excuse afterwards. I still, to this day, will try, find myself making up a white lie. And I'm like, don't say that. Just say no. Being yourself. And that you're enough. And you don't have to dress it up. Sometimes in my family system, it feels like everybody has to throw out their achievements to be validated. Like, what did you do? What are you up to? And it's like, not jack shit. I'm just okay the way I am. I don't have to do something to validate my worth. Again, these are just normal messages in any kind of dysfunctional family system. Boundaries were laughed at when I brought that up in my early recovery. Boundaries, what's this boundary shit? And I'm just like, oh, I'm sorry, you think it's funny, but my life depends on setting boundaries, because if I don't, I'm going to drink and die. So I pray everybody finds recovery out there. I pray my whole family finds recovery. It's a choice. You can either choose to get well, or you can stay the way you are. You have that right. But it's hard for people to admit they need help. That seems to be the number one obstacle. I don't need to go there. They know, I don't want to hear that. I hear that from my patients' families all the time. So my heart goes out to people who are severely afflicted by this, because it can cost you your life. And I mean, long before you die, it can cost you your life, because you're so wrapped up in someone else that you're not fully living. You don't have your full, free existence on this planet. It's sad to watch. So please, send us questions. Get help. Let's talk more about this, because I can only cover so much. Dan, what's your experience with codependency since you've come to this program? Even just hearing the word, I don't know if you had heard it before you came to recovery.
I think I heard it thrown around. I don't know. I would have told you I didn't have any codependency when I was new, and I flipped this, like you said, I see codependency in my new guys all the time, and it's just not something you can really kind of work on out of the gates in a sense. You got to get some sobriety and get some stability in that area of your life before you can really do anything about this other one. And I find that it kind of comes natural in recovery. Of course, I say it a million times, I had a great teacher, so I had somebody guiding me in that way. But I look back, and even as we were sitting here talking, I look some stuff up. It has 20 things: feeling unworthy or inadequate, people pleasing to seek validation and avoid confrontation. That's one I can think of pretty well, of people pleasing, and then also just about doing anything to avoid confrontation, especially in my intimate relationship. As I go back, and same thing with recovery, you're continually growing and you're continually seeing. And I know you said a minute ago, don't muddle back on stuff, but and I'm not, but I can see where some of that codependent behavior was showing up all through my life, like a fear of abandonment, struggling to form and maintain intimate relationships. I was married for 17 years. I don't know that I would have called that today an intimate relationship. It was more of a codependent relationship. I would do anything to keep her. I've heard this said too, that you the only way I can be okay if she's okay.
Yes.
That if she's not okay, I'm not okay, and you see that pretty often in walking around observing other people's lives.
And another angle on that is what happens if they have a terrible challenge in their life. You'll let it wreck your day.
Yep.
And it's like, look, man, you show them empathy. You say, I'm here for you. You listen to them. Do anything you can to help. And then you go off and have a great day. You don't carry their burden like it's your burden. They have to go through that, not you. Oh, it's so terrible. They had to go to the hospital. Okay, yeah, it's terrible, but why is it wrecking your day? That's codependency for sure.
Yep, and you see that pretty often, that people that are, their day, just like you said, their day's wrecked because somebody in their family's doing bad. Trying to fix other people's problems, difficulty receiving kindness, that's another one that I always had, nah, man, and I'd push off. I can look at myself back through the years of always pushing off any kind of praise or kindness that was thrown my way and downplaying it. Today I know how to say thank you.
I don't need it. I'm strong enough. I don't,
Yeah, and I don't need it, but when I receive it, I can receive it.
No, I mean that's the weird message we have in our head. When I'm denying a compliment or something, it's like, oh, I'm good. I don't.
Right. Yeah.
I handle my shit. Even kindness, I think, is where we turn it away. That I handle my shit. I don't need help. Yeah.
And seeking approval, trying to be perfect, my perfectionism stuff, for the longest time, I could not be caught being wrong. That just was not allowed by my psyche. I can't be caught being wrong. And here's an interesting one: attracting needy people.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. And and I've seen it in my life, and it took a few years before I could start approaching that in recovery and start looking at how that's working in me, and just not too long ago with my daughter's addiction, I got pretty damn sick in codependency, and I could not see it for anything until, like you said, with the value of a sponsor, I don't see me very good or at all, and you informed me, and we talked about how I was getting too involved in how good she's doing or not, and I was needing her to do some things for me to be okay, and that doesn't work out well. And I will say it again, I was so tore up by it, that some of my friends had thought I had relapsed and started using because of how my mood and my disposition changed from that. That's a bit spooky when you think about it, that it does that to you that deeply. And it is interesting how so many relationships, when the codependency is broken, so to speak, like the one person gets sober, how the relationship will fail. It's been something that I've been surprised about in recovery from the beginning. You'd think that when one person got sober, that would strengthen most relationships, and it seems it's usually the other way. But I can, I can say I've come a long way. I don't need somebody else anymore. That was the other thing. I had to have a girl, or I wasn't okay. My self-worth, my self-esteem was in the toilet unless I had a girlfriend, or a wife or somebody, and then that fear of abandonment going all the way back, and I get it that when you're in young relationships it's a little bit different, but you're probably forming this stuff back then. But like losing a girl wrecked me. I would be, and I get it. There's a piece of that that's not codependent. That's not, when a relationship breaks up, there's a grieving process kind of thing. But this was a little deeper than that, and I'm glad that we address it. And new guys just won't even hear it. It's like he never even said anything. But I see that codependency all over the place in the newcomers' lives, because they are tied up with somebody tight.
And compliment to you, Dan, from working this program and taking suggestions and working with your sponsor. I mean, You can gauge how well a person is with codependency by how much they spend time talking about the person who's the problem in their life. You know, if we could change them and work on them, then great, but it doesn't work. You can't control another person, and you certainly can't control another person who has this illness. That's beyond anybody's mortal capability. So what we say is work on you so that you can be there for her when she really needs you. And I rarely hear you getting caught up in what she's up to, and that's healthy. You know, now, again, anybody out there would be like, but it's your daughter and you're a parent. It's like, yes, even parents need to pull away from their children. They have their own journey. They have their own custodian. You're their custodian, but they have their own higher power. That's a really important lesson I learned in recovery. Is you're not in charge of them, and you don't control their spiritual path. You're to guide them. You're their custodian, but you don't. That's between them and God.
Yeah.
And their soul has to go through certain experiences the same as ours did. Your daughter has to have her process.
Yep. She was over today. I did her taxes.
Oh, yeah?
She asked me an interesting question. She said, "Dad, you seem to be okay all the time. That you're just steady and you're okay all the time." I was like, "Well, thank you for that." And she said, "How do you do that?" I said, "Well, working a 12-step program. That's how I
Isn't
do
it
that."
like when they throw that back at you, you're like, me? You know, because like my patients will say, "You're so calm." And I'm like, now on this podcast, I'm a little animated, but I guess I am fairly calm as an old timer, but I don't see myself that way. Yeah, I mean, I work in a mental hospital, and I've got the smile on my face, and I'm not bouncing off the walls like other therapists are. But
there's a solidness to you and a steadiness, you know, whether if it's like calm, I don't know. But that's one of the things, the words that I like I see people who have that steadiness and that solidness about them, you know. They're not blowing around in the wind, and they know where they're at and who they are. And I think sometimes that appears to be calm.
It's this program, and it is a function of age as well. The older you get, you're just not so concerned about what other people think anymore. Yeah. But there were some things you were saying on that list, and I want to point out there's some books that are available. Al-Anon has their own book, which if you go to alanon.org, you can get their book, and or Amazon, whatever. And also, there's a book that I like. It's an older one, but it's just one of those seminal books. It's called Codependent No More, with Melody Beattie, Beattie. And it's just a good book because it's from her point of view, from having the illness herself and learning about it. And again, I'm going to do a podcast in the future about adult children of alcoholics, because that's a whole ball of wax in itself, and I have that bad. But she's been treated. And all these things, for just put some hope on the end here, is they are treatable. They are completely treatable, and you don't have to suffer from them the rest of your life. It really depends on how much pain have you already had that you've had enough. And I look for those words in my patients when they say that. It's like, you know what, it's just not worth it. This fellow recently in my group who flipped a car 3 or 4 times and barely survived. And I was like, you got the message now? Is that enough pain? And it's like, I think so. And there was a couple of other details I won't get into, but it was not a good story, to say the least. Going to jail and prison is not a good story. So we hope you will contact us and stay in touch with us on all these things, and we'll help you in any way we can, because that's what we do.
I quickly Googled codependency books, and it put 10 of them across the screen. 7 of them are different versions of Codependent No More. 7 of the 10.
It's a seminal
and
book.
One of them's
really
in one of them appears to be like in Japanese or something.
Oh, no kidding? Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Let's get into our question and answer period. There's at the end of the podcast, we take questions from you, the listener, on any topic whatsoever. We would be happy to help you. Should you do a garden this spring? Are you psychic? Does it really rain cats or dogs? Is that just a saying? I mean, literally, please send us your questions on anything, and we will not identify you. It's all anonymous, and we'll have some fun, and we'll help you out with any experience, strength, and hope that we have. Again, our address is iam12wordrecovery@gmail.com, and we want to hear from you, so say hi. Thanks. All right, we have 2 questions for this week, and they're very timely, especially the first one. So let's get right into it. It says, hello, everybody. They are releasing a ketamine nasal spray for depression symptoms. How dangerous will that be when it gets out to the youth? And it seems to me to be a very easy way to abuse this medication. I would have to agree with you. We do know that administration of use, that's administration of use, is the one of the hallmarks of addiction as to whether a person gets addicted faster and with more assurance guarantee that they will get addicted. So obviously if you drink it or eat it, it takes 20 or minutes more to digest. But if you snort it, it's faster. If you shoot it, it's way fast. And so then again, that's a propensity that you'll get sicker faster. So I don't know. I've been in the field long enough. I've seen a lot of things come and go. I've been educated on the history of addiction treatment that I've seen billions of things come and go. And there seems to always be another magic bullet elixir down the road. Because why? Because people are so desperate to find any answer to this unsolvable problem. It is absolutely maddening to the families and the friends to watch somebody die before your eyes. So I get the desperation. And, you're going to a doctor and you think, well, he's a doctor and it's scientifically approved. And maybe if it's this, FDA approved, right? If it's out as a prescription. So I look at evidence of what happens to people who do things. And I'll let Dan tell you his experience with ketamine. But our good friend Matthew Perry was killed by that. Let's be honest. And I believe those doctors are culpable. Now, you won't be able to convict them in any court of law. But you don't give a drug addict an addictive drug as part of their treatment. That's not understanding the fundamentals that addicts and alcoholics have a brain with a switch. That when any mood-altering chemical crosses that threshold, our switch goes go. Go. More. And he got a little bit of that ketamine through his doctor, and he said, I want more. And he sent his assistant out with argument, but then paid him enough money to get a bunch, and took so much that he drowned in his swimming pool because he couldn't find the way out. It's a disorienting drug. It's a horse tranquilizer. It's a sedative. So what do we do? We're just mellowing you out to the point where you don't do anything, and so then you're not going to use? Is that the point? I am an open-minded counselor, and I am science-based, so I do know there's some research showing some productivity for the application of ketamine for alcoholism and addiction. I don't buy it. I think it's another false prophet. They come and go. And so I would caution everybody out there, if it seems too good to be true, and if it seems like a quick fix, it's going to be a magic bullet, it's probably a bunch of horse shit. Nobody seems to want to do the real solution, which we have evidence-based fact that the 12-step recovery program works within 4 to 6 months to get a person free of their addiction. But again, who wants to wait 4 to 6 months when I can spray something up my nose? And that's a problem with our culture, is this instant fix. My argument to that is, look, if you just buckle down and do the steps right the first time, you'll save money and you'll save a lot of time. Because what happens with my patients is they chase the ketamine, they chase the Suboxone, they chase the, what's the old school Suboxone?
Methadone?
Yeah, methadone. Sorry, I just drew a blank. They chase the methadone, whatever, and then they're back in treatment because they hit the wall going back to using. And this goes over and over 20, 30 years. When literally, if you just spent 4 to 6 months, you could have saved 30 freaking years. Talk to my friend Travis about his in and out on treatment, who's been on this podcast. It's the standard story. Do the most proven, scientifically backed, because we have scientific evidence now, 12-step methodology is the best methodology to get well. And don't fall for the hype. As far as it being to the youth, yes. If it's in the medicine cabinet, the youth will find it. And it will be dangerous, and some may lose their life from overusing it. It's a very potent drug. So, Dan, you want to share your experience with this ketamine?
Yeah, I did a little Googling
craze.
Too. It's a Johnson & Johnson product, and it says it was first approved in 2019 to be used in combination with antidepressants. And what this new thing is they've now approved it as a standalone thing for antidepressants. Here's the thing: Spravato brought in sales of $780 million for the first 9 months of 2024.
9 months. Wow, there's a lot of people really a
700.
quick fix. But see, look, how many depressed people drink?
Yeah,
I just got a
it's
person
depressant.
today who said they had depression and they were drinking for their depression. But so aren't you just giving them a drink?
Yeah.
If you're giving them another depressant, I don't see the science.
Yep, I still have trouble with giving a guy a drug for a drug problem. I don't see how that
Well,
works.
have you ever seen success with
I've never seen it work.
Okay. And then your personal experience with ketamine?
Well, my daughter had did some kind of like 6-week deal or something. I can't remember, 6 doses or something. She got it IV, and I think she got a little of this nasal spray too. And when I talked to her about it, she said one thing: she felt good when she got it, right? But there was a pretty good.
I don't mean to laugh, but I would feel good too.
Yep. But she said it was a pretty hard come down off of it. That when she later on in the day when she got home, she actually made her feel worse. And then she did that. I got asked to help pay for it, and I stood my boundary on my thing and said, no, I'm not paying for a drug problem. I know what you should do. I know the solution, but y'all don't want to do this one. And about a month after she got done with her treatments, she crashed and burned again real hard. And I don't even think at that point, I do think it was mostly mental health is what the crash and burn was, not so much that the alcohol and pot didn't help, but it wasn't like she went on a using rampage and crashed and burned. She was just not okay. She was hallucinating, and she was, a lot of goofy symptoms was coming out of her. And, I have to think from standing where I'm standing at, it looked like those two things were related to one another.
Well, we know that it causes suicidal ideation, and I'm always wary of any drug. Sometimes during the television advertisements, they'll have a drug. Side effects include suicide. So wait a minute, what?
What?
I'm getting a drug to help me, but it may make me kill myself? That, I don't know. That's a big red flag for me. But I would just say be very careful. I don't want to say Johnson & Johnson or anybody else is preying on people's misery, but I honestly believe there are bad actors who do prey on people's misery. Look at what's happening in California with the wildfires and these people jacking up rents and rental houses till they're unaffordable because they can do that. And it's just unbelievable what fellow humans will do to each other during times of crisis. So be careful out there, especially if you're a family trying to seek help for someone. Our good friend Catherine, who was just on the podcast, has been dealing with her family because she's sober, trying to tell them what works. And they say, well, let's try this or let's try that. And they're not listening to her, and it hasn't been working. So it's just, I don't know, crazy stuff.
Yeah, one of the side effects is intoxication. High blood pressure, dizziness, headaches, blurred vision.
Well, that makes me
anxiety,
wonder,
nausea,
man, if you
vomiting.
can die coming off sedatives, benzos, and alcohol, I mean, is it possible that this detox, if somebody got fierce enough on it, would cause them to be in danger of dying?
I'm sure it would.
Because it's a depressant, right?
Yep.
Same dynamic. What happens with a depressant is your body just will shut down during detox. You just stop breathing. It's not about seizures. That's a whole separate set of problems. But you just literally go, ugh, and you flop out. And it's very frightening. So there's the message. Don't detox yourself. Get professional help out there with benzos and alcohol, but apparently with ketamine now too. I won't be surprised at all to see it start showing up in my group. Just like right now, and this is a side note, but marijuana, the new marijuana seems to be all, you know how we go through these phases of the opiate thing, we had the crack thing, and the meth has now surpassed everything else because it's cheap and it's everywhere. But now I'm seeing marijuana, just marijuana, and it's a consequence of being more accessible, more legal. Which in the state of Kentucky, we just made it medical, which pretty soon means we'll be recreational.
Yeah.
It's just the way it goes. All right, so great question though, and if you do have children, lock your medicine cabinet. Make sure they can't get access to your past medications because they may take a bunch of blood pressure medicine thinking it's an opiate or something, and then they might actually die from that. All right, second question, which I think is pretty cool. I like this one. Being in recovery over several years, congratulations, good job. I noticed some people who clearly got it, so to speak, quote unquote, and others who have been through the step work, but they just don't have the same, quote unquote, light, so to speak. And oftentimes we hear from people that a new teacher or a new perspective was very helpful to help them truly come into what this program is all about. So, what are some of the telltale signs you see in people who got it versus those you feel may benefit from something a little more or different? Thank you for the answer, prayer hands. Thank you for the question. Appreciate that. Oh my, oh my, oh me. I was in recovery going along many, many years thinking I'm doing just fine. And the problem with my recovery as I look back now is it was still self-centered. It was about me going to meetings for me. I wasn't sponsoring people unless you asked me. I wasn't seeking it. I'm not trying to actively look to help be of service. And I was still besieged by self-centeredness. That's all there is to it. And I met teachers at 18 years sobriety who took me to a new level of recovery that I didn't know existed. And then I tried to come back to the rooms and preach about it and say, you guys, there's a great new level. There's a deeper level. And they're all looked at me like, who do you think you are? Oh, yeah, listen to you. And I got made fun of and put down. And I'm just like, oh, my God. I even heard one guy say, what does he think? He's some sort of messiah? Yeah. Crazy shit, right? Crazy shit. And then a guy gets, he gets a little bit leveled up. And he's got good stuff going on he wants to share with others, and suddenly he's a nut job. It's what we do to a lot of our prophets throughout history. So, I'm not saying I was a prophet. I'm saying that I got a hold of something that was like gold, and I wanted to share with everybody, and they just didn't seem to want it. So, my personal experience is that everybody goes to a different sponsorship school. Now, there is no such thing as a school for sponsors. It just means what they were taught is all they have to pass on. And a lot of people were taught a certain way to approach the big book, a certain way to approach the program, and it might be more old school. And my experience with old school means translation, we ain't working on the child stuff. Your trauma and all that stuff, save that for therapy or whatever. And sometimes they'll say don't even go to therapy, or sometimes they say don't take your medications. That's old school, right? It's crazy stuff. It's not even in the big book, but it exists. And then you get the people that are like, well, I've done enough just to be okay. I did a little bit of 1, 2, 3, maybe looked at little things in 4, maybe made an amends or 2, and then they're calling themselves sober, walking the rooms and sponsoring people. And it's deadly. I've seen people take people on as a sponsor and then they don't take their phone calls. I've seen people take on a sponsee and they're not available. And they're not taking them through the steps. I'll ask them in my group, so where's your sponsor got you in the steps? Oh, we haven't started yet. You've known him for a month. You haven't started yet? What's going on? Well, he's busy. What? And so this sponsor thinks, well, I'm talking to him occasionally and maybe I meet him at a meeting, so I'm their sponsor. No, you have a job, son. Your job is to show them how to get sober. Go through the book. That is your main job as a sponsor. So, like I say, different schools of sponsorship is part of it. And part of it's just a lot of people don't want to look at their past. They are so damaged by the trauma that happened to them, they do not, we don't go there, we don't talk about it, we're not going to admit it's there. And they are shut down. And you cannot get them to go to that next level because they just don't want to. It's too painful. They don't want to do the work. So, what we do is we try to incorporate all the new teachings that are coming along because this program's been around for 90 years. And we're trying to bring it into the new age because it's going to change and must change according to our founder. And we want to share that with everybody. So the tools we have, a lot of them are going to be in the book I'm finishing for everybody to be able to do the steps, are the advanced level tools. Things like a God inventory that's not in the big book. Things like the forgiveness prayer and stuff in step 8 that's not even mentioned in the original text of the program. And these are things we've learned over the years that will take you to that next level of happy, joyous, and free. And I look around at my friends and I see they don't have it, and I'm sad for them. As far as telltale signs, I think criticism and judgment are the two biggest ones I see. People who don't have a good, solid healing are short-tempered. They're critical of others, especially newcomers. They're judgmental. They make comments. They're mean. They don't mean to be. They're not mean people, but it just spills out. You know, that bile, that unhealed blech. Just say, I got to say something about the newcomer did this tonight. It's like, dude, what the fuck? He's just a newcomer. Leave him alone. We just talked a second ago about this calmness they say I have, or the way I carry myself, whatever it is. It's well, that's healing. I've been able to heal those demons, so I'm not a fucking basket case anymore. And, you know, you look around the rooms, you'll see a lot of basket cases. So I pity them. I offer it to them. I'm willing to help anybody. That's my job now as an older sponsor. I work with newcomers all day long in my group, so I'm not keen to take on a newcomer. But I will take on somebody that says, I see that you got something more. I want to get something more. I want to go to that next level. And that's the words I was taught by my sponsor. More and better, more and better, more and better. I should constantly be seeking to grow in this program. And according to my founder, Bill Wilson, of this program, it's unlimited. You can go as far with this as you want.
And mandatory.
Huh?
And mandatory. He says you must continue to grow.
Very good. Very good. So what do you think about that, Dan? The people who got it and, you know, telltale signs or, you know, I don't know. The rooms are filled up with all different types. Let's say that.
Yeah, there certainly are. And you did a pretty good description. I mean, I think even the newcomer can sense that in people, the difference between, say, you or me and the other guy who don't have what we have. If they hang around a little bit, it's pretty plain if they, if they'll stop using and open their ears and their eyes and watch what people are doing, right? I can do all the talking in the world, but what is he doing? What am I doing? And you see what somebody's doing, and you can tell the difference between somebody who has only done a little of it. Like you said, I don't know that some people can't.
I'll throw the compliment back at you and take us out of it. You know, when my patients come from our meeting and they're little guinea pigs that have no bias, they're just going there to see if it's a good meeting. Invariably, your name and Travis, they'll say, "Man, those guys, they got something. They can see that." Yeah. So you're not making that stuff up. We're not talking about ego here.
Yeah, no. I'm careful about it too, and a little bit careful to watch when you're going places and you start talking about this more leveled up, deeper level recovery, because it offends some people that don't have it. You know, instead of going, "Hey, what are you talking about? I want some of that." Instead of that, they'll shut down or start knocking it and. And it is kind of funny, you know. Why wouldn't you, as we said, you know, why would you want to use a 90-year-old book when some new tools have come along? And it's still the foundation of what we're doing. We're not violating anything by what we're doing with these advanced tools. I mean, somebody please tell me that actually teaching forgiveness is a violation of the 12 steps. No, it's right along. It's a tool that they didn't have in 1935, 1940, all for some time. And Bill did expand on that in the 12 and 12, so he made some movement on that, and it's a good thing that we're improving these tools. But you hear this stuff, you still hear it, that you got to do it by the book. If it ain't in the book,
I need to know was in the first 164 pages.
You're doing these things that are not in the book, but
then I say, what book? Because Bill wrote the 12 and 12. Are you just going to throw that away?
Yep.
Bill wrote all kinds of great articles for the Grapevine. Is that garbage?
Right. Yeah, there's a whole bunch. We inventory our entire lives. If you just do it by the big book, if you just read that big book, you're just going to make a list of the people you're angry with. And there's a lot more going on than just what you're angry with. And I love old Bob Earl. He's one of my very favorites, and back in the 60s and 70s, he was talking about inner child work and trauma and getting booed in circuit speaker type things. And I think at some point he did get blacklisted where they didn't want him back anymore. Because he was talking about the very stuff that we're doing.
That's how we treat our prophets as a species. I'm telling you, we exile them, we crucify them, we throw them out.
And now today, it's a well-known fact that stuff is underneath of all of our substance abuse and other kind of mental health issues that we got are almost always linked to some kind of childhood trauma. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just known now.
And so, what does a person who's not healed their trauma do? They fucking lash out at others because they're hurting. Yeah. That's why an old timer's acting that way.
Yep. Yep. It's it is interesting. That's this human species who, when you got something, and that's another Bob Earl thing, man. If you got, if you're trying to offer me something that's working for you, I will instantly reject it. And you see it in the rooms all the time when we talk about these more advanced, deeper level tools that we're using. That, you might as well flip the light switch off on their chest because they're done. They just won't hear it.
But I always go with results, and at the bottom end of the journey, I've always been very practical about my recovery. I don't care what tool you have if it doesn't work. I'm going to try it. If it doesn't work, it's horseshit. Ketamine, fuck you. I mean, from what I've heard, it hasn't worked. Screw it. So if it doesn't work, and it does work, that's a key distinction. And we didn't know if it was going to work. When I first got well with these new tools, I didn't know if it was going to translate to my sponsees because it's very hard to speak on your experience. Well, we did this, and then you should try this, but it's not the book. And then they did it, and they said, well, this is a whole different way of doing the steps. I've never done them like this. You hear that all the time, right?
Every time, yeah. I love it. It's the best compliment I can get.
And then they say, I feel better than I've ever felt, which is the goal, right? So there's that, and then there's also this aspect of we didn't know if it was going to work for normal people when we started our groups, 12-step spiritual recovery here in town for the average people. Come in and learn about the 12 steps. Do they have that level of desperation to even do the work? And will it work for them the same as it does for everybody else? Of course it does. We have billions of 12-step groups for every condition you can imagine, except for the average person. And they're getting that deeper level of recovery, and they're telling us how their entire lives are miraculously changing. So, again, I'm going with the results, man. I don't know why you would settle for half. We as addicts and alcoholics never settled for bad grade anything. Yeah. We wanted the top shelf, top level stuff all the time. But I see people, to answer your question, they do settle for low grade recovery, and it's sad to watch.
Well, you'd mentioned before, too, some people, it seems that some people are so badly hurt that they just cannot go back and access that stuff and look at it. So, therefore, they miss out on this high-octane juice that we get.
Mm-hmm. So, the best news of all to end on is you get to pick your own teachers in recovery. So, we have a whole podcast on your teachers, so check that out. And go with somebody good. That's all I would say. Go with somebody that has what you want. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up for this episode. As we say at the end of every podcast, thank you for being with us. We don't hit you on the head with this a lot, but if there's anything you can do personally to give us a like or a comment or pass it along to someone else, that raises our metrics so that we can reach more people. And right now we're just sort of buried in the YouTube universe and nobody can find us. We're microscopic. We need to sort of build those numbers so we can get more people to have access to these tools. And we do appreciate you being here today. All right. Well, we're going to end with a serenity prayer, which is the way we end every podcast. So, Dan, if you'd like to join me. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Just for today. Keep coming back. It works if you work it, and you die if you don't. Woohoo! Come back and see us. We love you. Peace out.